Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 48, dated September 20th, 2020. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled William Howard Taft, Our Presidential Chief Justice. Most of you know that William Howard Taft is the only man in American history who served both as President of the United States and then later as Chief Justice of the United States. Taft served as America's 27th president from 1909 to 1913, and then as America's 10th Chief Justice from 1921 until his resignation in 1930. Taft was a man who was born to be a judge. Unlike a lot of people who find themselves later on in life in terms of what career they should be in, William Howard Taft was a man who wanted to be a judge from the beginning. That was his goal. That was where he flourished. Taft did not flourish in executive or other positions where he was subordinate to an electorate or responsible or beholden to an appointing official. No. Taft was a born judge, okay? And in judicial office is where he shined. He first held judicial office in the state of Ohio from 1887 to 1890, and then on the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, federal judge, from 1892 to 1900. As President of the United States from 1909 to 1913, he is ranked by most historians as a middle-of-the-road chief executive, and that's a pretty fair assessment, as the Taft presidency was more of an obstruction to progressives, than a facilitator of their causes. Taft was essentially a conservative guy, by no means as energetic and forceful and forward-thinking as his immediate predecessor, and arguably the man that propelled him into the presidency, Theodore Roosevelt. As such, Taft falls in the league of men who only held one term as President of the United States. Another thing worth mentioning about the Taft presidency is that he appointed so many Democrats to office that one individual remarked that if Taft were Pope, he would have filled the College of Cardinals with Protestants, which I thought was very humorous. Indeed, Taft was a strange guy in the presidency who often behaved more like a Democrat than the Republicans would have liked. Indeed, also, Taft did not do much of anything to improve the civil rights or conditions of African Americans either. I figure that's definitely worth mentioning. Some suggest, with respect to his Supreme Court appointments, that he deliberately appointed Edward White as Chief Justice in 1910 because first and foremost, White was getting up in age, and he presumed, and if this was a presumption, it was a dead-on presumption, that White would not live very long, period, after that point, and wouldn't serve very long as Chief Justice, and thus was setting himself up later on down the road for the position. Okay? I'll add that White was also a Democrat. Although no evidence of that such a Machiavellian plot exists, if that was Taft's intent, like I said, it played out perfectly. Okay? In 1921, 11 years after his appointment as Chief Justice, Edward White died. And President Warren G. Harding would later appoint Taft to the nation's highest judicial office, Chief Justice of the United States. You know, this accomplishment of it in itself is a great one, as we have never, ever had a former president head the Supreme Court and thus the federal judiciary as well. That alone earns Taft a rank, of great to a small extent. Okay. Now, as Chief Justice, his greatness does not come from his judicial philosophy, okay, or his political bends, but rather for his reforms as Chief Justice and for his ultimate securing of the funding for a Supreme Court building. We'll break both of these down individually. Due to the very, very heavy work of the Supreme Court and most of the federal courts at that time, Taft successfully lobbied for a judiciary bill in 1925, which was passed. And that bill largely gave the Supreme Court control over its own docket, okay? A reality that exists to this very day. Because, like I said, that's the Judiciary Act of 1925. It greatly expanded the court's discretionary preference over the cases that it would hear. Okay, and every judiciary bill and every reform since that time, which has limited cases coming to the Supreme Court, okay, has been the fruit, the posterity rather, of the 1925 Judiciary Act, okay, which was the first initial bill which allowed the Supreme Court great discretion in the cases that it hears, okay? And next, after that, Taft began advocating for the Supreme Court to have its own building. As crazy as it sounds, from the court's beginning all the way until 1935, it did not have its own building. Instead, it met in the U.S. Capitol building, okay? And to Taft, that was very problematic, as the court was an independent institution and it needed its own facilities. And as a result, he lobbied very hard for this as Chief Justice. What better position to be able to advocate for such than as Chief Justice, okay? And in 1929, Congress finally passed an appropriations bill for the creation of a new Supreme Court building. The cost would be roughly $9 million. Doesn't sound like very much today, but in the context of 1929, $9 million was a whole lot of bread. Okay? Nonetheless, they passed the appropriations bill, and construction on the building would commence in 1932. Taft's time on the Supreme Court was marked by a certain conservative flow. He himself was a very conservative man and certainly did not change as the Chief Justice of the United States. He often viewed his role as holding the line against the more radical members of the court, such as Louis Brandeis and Oliver Wendell Holmes, both of whom he ultimately befriended, but certainly didn't agree with their legal and social philosophies on much, which lets you know that he certainly was able to separate work from his personal life. Like I said, he got along with these guys pretty decently when it came to normal circumstances. But when it came to the work of the court, they were often on different pages, okay? And Taft, health-wise, his health actually improved as Chief Justice of the United States as he, began to adopt a more disciplined regimen. It began to fail, inevitably, by the late 1920s, and he deliberately hung on because he feared that a more liberal member, such as Associate Justice Harlan Fiske Stone, would be appointed Chief Justice after he retired. But Only with assurances from President Herbert Hoover that Hoover would not appoint Harlan Fiske Stone as Chief Justice did Taft finally retire on February 3rd, 1930. Okay? He died on the 8th of March, 1930, at the age of 72, not living to see the greatest fruit of his work, a new Supreme Court building, completed, as the Supreme Court's building was not complete until 1935, 5 years after his death. All right? So, that lets us know that William Howard Taft, okay, left us a legacy far greater than many would like to acknowledge. And some contend that he has no memorial. No, he doesn't have a sculpture designed to look like him, but we have the Supreme Court building. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the greatest memorial to William Howard Taft that could ever be presented. This man believed in the strength and independence of the Supreme Court as an institution. He fulfilled his lifelong dream in becoming a member of the Supreme Court, and what better role to hold than its Chief Justice. And on a personal note, I would say that in naming former presidents to the Supreme Court, that's a very, very, landmark thing to do. But I can only think of one former president that I would like to see named as Chief Justice, and that would be Barack Obama. Given his legal knowledge and certain, shaping of the political realm, I think he would be phenomenal in that position. So I thank you very much for listening to this History Bite about our nation's 27th President and 10th Chief Justice, William Howard Taft. I hope you learned a thing or two from this. Please continue to listen to my History Bites. You all are very, very appreciated. Take care. Stay safe out there. And I will talk to you at the next one. Peace.